There's a particular kind of ache that never quite announces itself. It doesn't show up as a crisis. It just sits in the background on an ordinary afternoon. The quiet sense that somehow, somewhere, you fell behind a schedule you don't remember agreeing to. You look at the people you came up with, and they seem to have settled into something. A career that actually fits. A direction, a version of themselves that already knows exactly what it is. You're still here, still circling, still not quite sure, carrying this low, persistent suspicion that maybe something in you is just a little broken. Even though, if someone pressed you on it, you couldn't really name what. I want you to sit with that feeling for a second, because I don't think it means what you've been told it means. I think there's a pretty good chance it's one of the clearest signs of a kind of person Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to understand. Not a defect, a type. And if you stay with the discomfort of it, instead of running from it, something specific starts to happen later on. We'll get to what that is. But first, you have to understand why your mind was never built to find itself early, and why the people who figure it all out fast are often the ones who pay the steepest price. Most people build an identity fast. They look around, they read what gets approval, what gets nodded at, what gets rewarded, and they shape themselves around it without ever quite noticing they're doing it. Jung had a name for the self you build for the outside world. He called it the persona. Think of it as a mask, not a sinister one, just a face you wear for so long that you forget it isn't actually your skin. And for a lot of people, that mask fits well enough. They move through their 20s with momentum. They collect the things that look like a life, the title, the partner, the plan, and it works. But here's the part the popular version of Jung always leaves out. The people who build themselves fastest on the outside are often the ones who slam into a wall in midlife they never saw coming. The life was real. They just never stopped to check whether it was actually theirs. You're wired a little differently. Your inner world runs loud. And I don't mean that poetically. I mean it almost literally. While most people process their lives by moving through them, you process yours by sitting with them, turning them over. Asking what something means before you'll let yourself decide what to do about it. And in your 20s, when the entire world is basically shouting at you to just pick a lane and go, that one tendency makes everything harder. Because you can feel when something doesn't fit. You get close to committing. A job, a relationship, a whole version of yourself. And something quiet in you refuses. You can't explain it. You might not even trust it. But your body knows before your mind catches up. That's not indecision. That's your sympathetic nervous system, the same circuitry behind fight or flight, registering a low, wordless threat. The sense that you're about to put on something that was never cut for you. But here's what most people miss about this. From the outside, it just looks like you can't get it together. Think about Daniel. He's 31, at the wedding of someone he went to school with. Everyone there seems finished somehow. The houses, the titles, the easy answers. Daniel just left his third job, and somewhere near the cake, someone asks him, warmly, "So what are you doing now?" He smiles, says something light. Then he steps outside to the parking lot for a few minutes, alone, under the floodlights. Not because he failed, but because something in him keeps refusing to click into the shape everyone else clicked into years ago. Jung called the work of actually becoming yourself individuation. And his view was that for certain people, the real version of that work happens underground, during the exact years that look, to everyone watching, like stagnation. Push it too hard and you don't get speed. You get a self that holds together for a while and then breaks. And there's data underneath this now. A 2025 study tracked 16 psychological traits across the whole span of adult life. Judgment, reading people, holding steady under pressure. Raw mental speed peaks in your 20s, sure. But your actual ability to function well in the world, to make good calls, peaks somewhere between 55 and 60. Part of that is just biology. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that weighs consequences, keeps quietly refining itself far longer than anyone ever tells you. Jung said almost the same thing decades earlier, without any of the numbers. "We cannot live the afternoon of life," he wrote on the program of life's morning. "If you've followed me this far, there's a real chance your mind doesn't switch off the way other people seem to. And if this is making you feel a little less alone in that, consider subscribing. It's free, and it genuinely helps this reach the people who need to hear it." There's another piece to this, and it's a harder one to say without it coming out wrong. This kind of person tends to see through things other people need to believe. You pick up on the gap between what someone is saying and what they actually mean. You notice when a whole room is excited about something that, underneath, feels strangely hollow. And you can't really switch it off. Jung called this the burden of consciousness. And burden is the right word, because more awareness doesn't only make life richer. It makes certain kinds of belonging genuinely harder. How are you supposed to perform the easy confidence everyone seems to expect when something in you keeps quietly noticing the cracks? So you pull back, sometimes physically, sometimes just somewhere behind your own eyes. And people read it. They read it as you being cold or difficult or checked out or maybe a little depressed. And I want to be honest here, because the romantic version of this does real damage. Sometimes it isn't just a misread. Sometimes it really does tip into depression. The line between pulling away from something false and genuinely sinking isn't always clear from the inside, and pretending otherwise helps no one. And this is where it gets harder to say out loud. Around that same stretch, the loneliness tends to get loud, and it has a strange shape to it. It's not that there's no one around. You can be in a room full of people who genuinely like you and still feel like none of it is quite landing. Like the conversations are running on a frequency you can hear perfectly well but can't seem to tune yourself into. You're right there, and you're somewhere else entirely, at the same time. And that feeling, being unreachable in the middle of a crowd, it probably isn't new. You've likely carried some version of it for as long as you can remember. Jung would have flagged this exact stretch as one of the most dangerous in a person's life, because this is where some people break, not loudly. They just quietly decide that the inner world causing all this friction isn't worth protecting anymore, and they set it down. They conform. They numb the signal. They pick the version of themselves that finally gets accepted somewhere, and they call it growing up. But here's the thing Jung was clear about. What you abandon in that moment doesn't actually disappear. It goes underground. He called that buried part the shadow. And it doesn't stay buried. It waits. And years later, it tends to resurface as a strange, low resentment you can't fully trace, pointed at a life you technically chose, but somehow never really wanted. That's the quiet tragedy he kept circling back to. Not the people who fail out loud, but the ones who succeed at becoming someone they never were. But the people who stay with the discomfort, who don't set the inner world down, go through something slow that can't really be taught. The need for approval starts to loosen its grip. The constant measuring of yourself against everyone else's timeline begins to matter less. And then, somewhere in the middle of life, something settles. For the people who built fast and early, this arrival often lands like a crisis. For you, it tends to feel more like relief, like the world is finally catching up to where you've quietly been living the whole time. And that's the specific thing I promised you at the start. The comparison loosens its grip. The sense of being behind just dissolves. So here's the reframe, and I want you to actually take it in. The slowness was never the defect. It was the cost of seeing in higher resolution, of a self that flatly refused to be finished before it was genuinely yours. The psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski had a name for this. He called it positive disintegration, the idea that falling apart, for certain people, isn't a breakdown at all. It's the necessary coming apart before you reassemble into something truer. So if you've felt behind for years, hold on to 3 things. First, stop measuring yourself with a clock that was never set for you. Second, when that quiet resistance shows up, don't bulldoze through it. Pause and ask what part of you is refusing and what it might be right about. And third, the one that matters most. You have not missed the window. You're in the middle of something that takes a long time, looks like failure from the outside, and ends somewhere the fast route simply never reaches. If this is the path you're on, I'd genuinely like to know, which part hit hardest? The years that looked like failure, or the loneliness in the middle of it? Tell me in the comments. And if any of this made you feel a little more understood, subscribe and hit the bell so the next one finds you too. Take care of yourself.